Hi there, I'm Patch, and you'll be reading with me today. Today we're going to be reading Night Shift by Stephen King. Did you know that Night Shift is actually a series of short stories? Is everybody ready? Great! Now, let's settle down, grab some cocoa, and let's begin. The Lawnmower Man. In previous years, Harold Parkett had always taken pride in his lawn. He had owned a large silver lawn boy and paid the boy down the block $5 per cutting to push it. In those days, Harold Parkett had followed the Boston Red Sox on the radio with a beer in his hand and the knowledge that God was in his heaven and all was right with the world, including his lawn. But last year, in mid-October, fate had played Harold Parkett a nasty trick. While the boy was mowing the grass for the last time of the season, the Kastenmeyer's dog had chased the Smith's cat right under the mower. Harold's daughter had thrown up half a quart of cherry Kool-Aid into the lap of her new jumper, and his wife had nightmares for a week afterward. Although she had arrived after the fact, she had arrived in time to see Harold and the green-faced boy cleaning the blades. Their daughter and Mrs. Smith stood over them, weeping. Although Alicia had taken time enough to change her jumper for a pair of blue jeans and one of those disgusting skimpy sweaters. She had a crush on the boy who mowed the lawn. After a week of listening to his wife moan and gobble in the next bed, Harold decided to get rid of the mower. He didn't really need a mower anyway, he supposed. He had hired a boy this year. Next year he would just hire a boy and a mower. And maybe Carla would stop moaning in her sleep. He might even get laid again. So he took the silver lawn boy down to Phil's Sunoco, and he and Phil dickered over it. Harold came away with a brand new Kelly Blackwall tire and a handful of high test. And Phil put the silver lawn boy out on one of the pump islands with a hand-lettered "For Sale" sign on it. And this year, Harold just kept putting off the necessary hiring. When he finally got around to calling last year's boy, his mother told him Frank had gone to State University. Harold shook his head in wonder and went to the refrigerator to get a beer. Time certainly flew, didn't it? My God, yes. He put off hiring a new boy as far as 1st May, and then June slipped past him, and the Red Sox continued to wallow in 4th place. He sat on the back porch on weekends and watched glumly as the never-ending progression of young boys he had never seen before popped out to mutter a quick hello before taking his buxom daughter off to the local passion pit. And the grass thrived and grew in a marvelous way. It was a good summer for grass. 3 days of shine, followed by one of gentle rain, almost like clockwork. By mid-July, the lawn looked more like a meadow than a suburbanite's backyard, and Jack Kastenmeyer had begun to make all sorts of extremely unfunny jokes, most of which concerned about the price of hay and alfalfa. And Don Smith's 4-year-old daughter Jenny had taken to hiding in it when there was oatmeal for breakfast or spinach for supper. One day in late July, Harold went out on the patio during the 7th inning stretch and saw a woodchuck sitting prettily on the overgrown back walk. The time had come, he decided. He flicked off the radio and picked up the paper and turned to the classified. Halfway down the part-time column, he found this: Lawns mowed. Reasonable. 7762390. Harold called the number, expecting a vacuuming housewife who would yell outside for her son. Instead, a briskly professional voice said, "Pastoral Greenery and Outdoor Services. How may we help you?" Cautiously, Harold told the voice how Pastoral Greenery could help him. Had it come to this, then? Were lawn cutters starting their own businesses and hiring office help? He asked the voice about rates, and the voice quoted him a reasonable figure. Harold hung up with the lingering feeling of unease and went back to the porch. He sat down, turned on the radio, and stared out his glandular lawn at the Saturday clouds moving slowly across the Saturday sky. Carla and Alicia were at his mother-in-law's, and the house was his. It would be a pleasant surprise for them if the boy who was coming to cut the lawn finished before they came back. He cracked the beer and sighed as Dick Drago was touched for a double and then hit a batter. A little breeze shuffled across the screened-in porch. Crickets hummed softly in the long grass. Harold grunted something unkind about Dick Drago and then dozed off. He was jarred awake a half an hour later by the doorbell. He knocked over his beer, getting up to answer it. A man in grass-stained coveralls stood on the front stoop, chewing a toothpick. He was fat. The curve of his belly pushed his faded blue overall out to a point where Harold half suspected he had swallowed a basketball. "Yes?" Harold Parkett asked, still half asleep. The man grinned, rolled his toothpick from one corner of his mouth to the other, tugged at the seat of his overalls, and then pushed his green baseball cap up a notch on his forehead. There was a fresh smear of fresh engine oil on the bill of his cap, and there he was, smelling of grass, earth, and oil, grinning at Harold Parkett. "Pastor Earl sent me, buddy," he said jovially, scratching his crotch. "You called, right? Right, buddy?" He grinned on endlessly. "Oh, the lawn. You?" Harold stared stupidly. "Yep, me." The lawnmower man bellowed fresh laughter into Harold's sleep-puffy face. Harold stood helplessly aside, and the lawnmower man trumped the head of him down the hall, through the living room and kitchen, and onto the back porch. Now Harold had placed the man, and everything was all right. He had seen the type before, working for the sanitation department and the highway repair crews out on the turnpike, always with a spare minute to lean on their shovels and smoke Lucky Strikes or Camels, looking at you as if they were the salt of the earth, able to hit you for $5 or sleep with your wife any time they wanted to. Harold had always been slightly afraid of men like this. They were always tanned, dark brown, and there were always nets of wrinkles around their eyes, and they always knew what to do. "The back lawn's the real chore," he told the man, unconsciously deepening his voice. "It's square, and there are no obstructions, but it's pretty well grown up." His voice faltered back to its normal register, and he found himself apologizing. "I'm afraid I've let it go." "No sweat, buddy. No strain. Great. The lawnmower man grinned at him with 1,000 traveling salesman jokes in his eyes. "The taller the better. Healthy soil. That's what you got there. By Circe. That's what I always say." "By Circe?" The lawnmower man cocked his head at the radio. Yastrzemski had just struck out. "Red Sox fan? I'm a Yankees fan myself." He clumped back into the house and down the front hall. Harold watched him bitterly. He sat back down and looked accusingly for a moment at the puddle of beer under the table with the overturned Coors can in the middle of it. He thought about getting the mop from the kitchen and decided it would keep. No sweat, no strain. He opened his paper to the financial section and cast a judicious eye at the closing stock quotations. As a good Republican, he considered the Wall Street executives behind the column type to be at least minor demigods. By Circe? And he had wished many times that he could better understand the word, as handed down from the mount not on stone tablets, but in enigmatic abbreviations as PCT and KDK and 3.28 up 2/3. He had once brought a judicious 3 shares in a company called Midwest Bison Burgers, Inc. that had gone broke in 1968. He had lost his entire $75 investment. Now he understood. Bison burgers were quite the coming thing, the wave of the future. He had discussed this often with Sonny, the bartender down at the Goldfish Bowl. Sonny told Harold his trouble was that he was 5 years ahead of his time, and he should. A sudden racketing roar startled him out of the new doze he had just been slipping into. Harold jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over and staring about wildly. "That's a lawnmower?" Harold Parkett asked the kitchen. "My God, that's a lawnmower?" He rushed through the house and stared out the front door. There was nothing out there but a battered green van with the words Pastoral Greenery, Inc. painted on the side. The roaring sound was in the back now. Harold rushed through his house, burst onto the back porch, and stood frozen. It was obscene. It was a travesty. The aged red power mower the fat man had brought in his van was running on its own. No one was pushing it. In fact, no one was within 5 feet of it. It was running at fever pitch, tearing through the unfortunate grass of Harold Parquet's back lawn like an avenging red devil straight from hell. It screamed and bellowed and farted oily blue smoke and a crazed kind of mechanical madness that made Harold feel ill with terror. The overripe smell of cut grass hung in the air like sour wine. But the lawnmower man was the true obscenity. The lawnmower man had removed his clothes. Every stitch! They were folded neatly in the empty bird bath that was at the center of the back lawn. Naked and grass-stained, he was crawling along about 5 feet behind the mower, eating the cut grass. Green juice ran down his chin and dripped onto his pendulous belly. And every time the lawnmower whirled around a corner, he rose and did an odd jumping skip before prostrating himself again. "Stop!" Harold Parker screamed. "Stop that!" But the lawnmower man took no notice, and his screaming scarlet familiar never slowed. If anything, it seemed to speed up. Its nicked steel grill seemed to grin sweatily at Harold as it raved by. Then Harold saw the smoke. It must have been hiding in stunned terror just ahead of the mower, in the swath of grass about to be slaughtered. It bolted across the band of lawn toward the safety under the porch, a panicky brown streak. The lawnmower swerved. Blatting and howling, it roared after the mole and spat it out in a string of fur and entrails that reminded Harold of the smith's cat. The mole destroyed, the lawnmower rushed back to the main job. The lawnmower man crawled rapidly by, eating grass. Harold stood paralyzed with horror, stocks, bonds, and bison burgers completely forgotten. He could actually see that huge pendulous belly expanding. The lawnmower man swerved and ate the mole. That was when Harold Parquet leaned out the screen door and vomited into the zinnias. The world went gray, and suddenly he realized he was fainting. Had fainted. He collapsed backward onto the porch and closed his eyes.